All right, hello everybody. Today we're going to be covering a lot of information, so I'm going to talk fast because I don't know about you, but I do not like long videos. So, we are talking about chalk pastels or soft pastels and oil pastels. So let's kick it off with some of the similarities, some of the things they have in common first. Both come in this stick-like form, as you can see. And if you put it on its side, it can be used to cover more space versus if you use the tip, you can make more precise, thin lines. So with both of these mediums, we want to work with several layers. Think about the rule of 3. So using at least 3 different shades or 3 different variants of colors that you want to use to make these really nice and thick and vibrant. And then after you get your layers for both of them, you add your details, your fine little marks, your last little details on top or last. Now for both of these as well, and this kind of goes for any sort of medium that you're working with, you never want to mix colors that are across from each other on the color wheel. The reason is whenever you mix colors across from each other on the color wheel, the complementary colors, they become a sort of muddied brown every single time. Now, if you want to add a complementary color to create a shading effect or a shadowed effect, that's fine. Just know what you're getting into before you do it. For both of these mediums, you can use the paper blender. Paper stump blender, tortillon, a couple different names for it, but either way, you can use it to blend. For both chalk pastels and oil pastels, you want to use black sparingly, if at all. The reason is it will smear really easily when you're working and create just a horrible black nasty effect. If you're going to use it, especially if you have a whole like silhouette or something you need to black out, you want to use it last so you have less opportunity for your hand to smudge it, other colors to smudge it, and it stays nice and crisp and that nice black color that you like instead of a swamp on your paper. Now once you finish your artworks, your paintings with either chalk or oil pastels, they do require some sort of covering. Typically the best way to preserve your artwork is to put it behind glass in a picture frame when you're using pastels. Especially for chalk pastels, you want to use some sort of workable fixative or regular fixative. I've also heard that you can use regular hairspray for this, or aerosol hairspray to set your chalk pastels. Last but not least, say you don't have a frame ready and you want to keep it from smearing, regular wax paper. Regular wax paper, if you just tear off a piece the size of your image, that is going to help preserve it. And you can tape it or make it double the size and fold it behind like a little plastic package. That way it protects your artwork from getting smudged as it's moved around. Okay, so for each of these, we've got some shared techniques that we're going to talk about. So techniques that they have in common. The first one is just going to be your regular blending. And that's what I showed you here, where I'm mixing the different colors. So you're going over top of other colors as you're blending. And if you want to do a gradient, of course you leave some of it uncovered. Like if I went from yellow to green, I would put my yellow on the left, green on the right, and then overlap somewhere in the middle so that we get that gradient. Same thing over here. If I had pink to purple, one on one side, one on the other, overlap in the middle. However, if you're not using that particular blending technique, another one that works for both of these is called scumbling. So scumbling is when you take multiple colors and you kind of just do this scribbling motion, leaving some white space available. And then with your other colors, you come in and in between in those white spaces, you start adding that color. White will a lot of times create this nice blend. But the key is not to completely blend it out like we did over here. It is to let your eyes do the work of blending. And this can create some really nice textured effects. Think about if you want to do trees or something that has a lot of that tactical texture. Okay, and then for the last technique that they share, it's going to be something called stippling. You might have heard of this before. Stippling is where you've got this kind of dotted effect. Now, you hear that sound? You don't want to hear that. It should just be little marks. Going like this, you're going to break your chalk, which is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but if you can prevent it, why not? Again, this will be helpful for a lot of your different textured surfaces that you want to portray, like leaves on a tree or grass in a field. And you keep going until you get that all filled in. I'm going to repeat. You don't really want to blend out your colors with this technique. You're just trying to let the person's eye, the viewer's eye, mix those colors in their mind. Can create a more dynamic painting than simply blending. Okay, so you've got these shared techniques. Now let's talk about some differences. So chalk pastels generically come in two different forms, hard and soft. And how do you know the difference? Well, the hard ones are compressed and they're typically in this kind of smaller rectangular prism form, versus your softer chalk pastels are bigger, they're thicker because the pigments are not compressed as much. Now, when you're working with pastels, any paper will do, but textured paper that's meant just primarily for chalk pastels, will create that more textured effect if that's what you're going for. So really have in mind what you want your outcome to be before you get started. I'm just going to be working on regular paper and construction paper. Before you get started, do have a damp napkin ready and available to wipe off your fingers, because this is going to get messy and you don't want to mix the colors unintentionally. So if I'm working with a green and then I go into an area that I want to be very nice light blue, I don't want to accidentally smudge that green into the pigment. First thing you'll typically do is block out these sections of colors, and these are just your base colors. Whenever you're working with pastels, it's called painting, actually, and it's called that for a reason. There's so many similarities between painting with like acrylic or oil paints and painting with pastels. And one of those similarities is you need to put your background colors first, your solid base colors first. Now, whenever you're working with pastels, you don't want to blow, because when you blow, it's going to streak across with all of those little bits of pigment. So if you have too much powder on your paper, what you want to do is lift it and knock it off rather than blow it off. Once you have your sections blocked off, this is where you come in and add your layers. Let's talk blending. So anyone who knows me or has spent any sort of time with me in the art room has probably heard me say, never blend with your finger. And in most cases, that is true, and I stand by that. However, I begrudgingly have to admit that in chalk pastels or soft pastels, blending with your finger is acceptable. Just don't get crazy, because if you go too crazy, it's just again going to be this swamp of colors instead of this beautiful mixture of pigments that you really want. So that's where I'm going now. I'm going to start blending a little bit with my finger. You can also, as we said before, use the blending stump, especially for really precise blends. Or you can take a piece of paper towel and fold it up until you get the point you want and use that for blending as well. For chalk pastels, if you mess up, you can't fully pull away the pigment, but a kneaded eraser is the best tool to use to try and lift up some of that pigment. So the compressed soft pastels are the ones that you want to use for your more thin lines, more precise details. Okay, one technique I want to show you guys actually is going to require, oops, an X-Acto knife. So if you take a color, and this can be done with any colors as well, and just shave a little bit of the pigment off. Then take a piece of your wax paper and lay it on top and just gently press it in. This is going to give you some really fine textures you might use for stars or fields of flowers that you couldn't get otherwise. And it'll hold it into the paper. One other technique that I really like that you can use the X-Acto knife and shaving the pigment is in your palette, shave some pigment and add a couple drops of just regular rubbing alcohol until you get the consistency you want. And what this is going to do is create a sort of paint, but quick drying paint out of the pastels. Oh, it's a little bit too light. Let me get a brighter white. And with this mixture, you can come in and paint some of those details that you couldn't have gotten otherwise. Keep going until you're finished. I'm going to put this aside for now and talk about some oil pastels with you. Like we said before, you can use it on its side or at a point to create your finer lines and finer details. Now the paper that you use is more important. This is just printer paper here, and that is not what I recommend using for your oil pastels. Actually, you want to use a paper specifically designed for oil pastels or a thicker matte paper. Usually this mixed media paper works pretty well, so that's what I'm going to use today. So we talked about the blending, scumbling, and stippling techniques for both chalk and oil pastels, but for oil pastels you have two more techniques that you can use, and they require something pointy. I've got this pointy stick. If you've got something like that, you can use it, or if you have a needle, you can use it. Something that's not going to put color on the paper, but will scratch into the paper. For this first technique I'm going to show you, it's called sgraffito. So basically you get your color onto the paper, add your layers, and with your pointy object you're going to scratch away whatever it is that you want. So a lot of times people will use this for things like grass or really tiny highlights or hair. You can see its effectiveness. Now the next one is called etching. It's pretty similar in that you use the same tool and you're going to scratch what you want, but you literally scratch straight into the paper. So I have some pigment on here so you can kind of see it. But whenever you go over it with your color, it should show up. That one's not too great, if I do say myself. Some artists will use this technique for signing their name. They'll put it in the paper before they do their artwork. Up to you. Now if you get these little shavings, what you can do is take a nice soft brush and gently wipe them away. But even that sometimes can cause it to smear, so be very careful. Of course, like I said before, you can blend with the paper stump. You do not use your finger, despite what some people may tell you about oils. Instead, I recommend using the napkin technique as well. or for finer details, you can use a Q-tip. Something to watch out for with pastels. If you've got a lighter color and a darker color that you're trying to blend, it's recommended that you do light on top of dark instead of dark on top of light. So let's take a look at it. I've got my light here, I'm gonna put my dark on top, the no-no. Can I get that effect? Versus this one, I'm gonna put the light on top of dark. A little bit smoother with the light on top of dark. You can see the splotches in here if you look closely. Definitely gets lighter putting the light on top of dark. So if you want something to be really bright versus a darker mixture, think about that. Let's say I'm doing that same image of the grapefruit. I'm going to do the same method of blocking out my colors first. Something to keep in mind, your end result with oils should be thick enough to where you do not see through to the paper. Like right now, you're seeing bits of the white through to the paper, right? But I'm doing that so that I can add multiple layers of color to this and blend it in really nicely. But in general, by the time you finish, you do not want any paper showing through. I'll be honest with you guys, this is not a new or good set of oil pastels. I got this set when I was a kid, so probably about 15 years ago, maybe more. And it was just one of those little kids sets that come with the watercolors and cheap colored pencils. So this mixing you're seeing here is not quite the full extent of what you can get with even a decent set of oil pastels. So another thing you can do with oil pastels is kind of transform them into oil paints a little bit. And there are specific types of oils you can use. Linseed oil is one of them. But if you just want to work with what you have at home, you can use baby oil. The only difference is one of these oils made for paints is going to actually dry out of it into the air. Baby oil will not. See how it produces that pigmented paint? Okay, that's not finished, but we're going to stop for now. Thank you guys so much for joining me on my beginner's tutorial of chalk and oil pastels. See you next time.